Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another video of Learn with Zari. Today we will be discussing cerebrum, which is an important part of brain. So before we start this topic, I would urge you to subscribe to my channel for more such content. Also, I have handwritten notes of CNS with me. If you want, I can send you a PDF. Just comment your email below. Alright, now starting off with the topic, cerebrum has two parts mainly, which is cerebral cortex and the other part is the white matter. So the white matter consists of the fibers. We'll discuss that later. For now, let's discuss the cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex has two hemispheres which are joined by corpus callosum. It has four main lobes. Here's a diagram. This is not exactly to scale. This is just a diagram for a better understanding. So this pink one is the frontal lobe. The yellow one is the parietal lobe, green is temporal, and the purple one is occipital. So let's remember it with the mnemonic F part. Now, F for frontal, and frontal is responsible for future planning and motor skill. The parietal lobe, P for parietal, and let's just say P for perception, can be sensory as well as spatial. Now, for occipital lobe, O for occipital and O for optic, it is involved in vision. Now coming to the temporal lobe, T for temporal and let's say T is for tone, which can be hearing, T for time, and also memory and emotion. So this was the basic function of the lobes. We will discuss this in further detail. That will help us understand the lesions and help you solve the MCQs as well. Now here's a detailed diagram. So the frontal lobe is this one, then this is the parietal lobe, this is the temporal lobe, and this is the occipital lobe. We will be discussing each lobe in detail. Starting with the frontal lobe, as I just mentioned previously, it is associated with future planning and motor functions. It has a prefrontal area, as you can see in pink over here. The prefrontal area is responsible for decision making and social behavior. The premotor area over here is mainly associated with imaging of the planning. So basically, whatever a person is planning to do, let's say he's planning to climb up the stairs and then go to the room, he'll form kind of an image in his mind. It is also involved in learned motor patterns. Now, the primary motor area, which is also known as precentral gyrus, this is central gyrus. This is an approximation of it. So the area present before it is a part of frontal lobe and is also known as precentral gyrus. The area after it is a part of parietal lobe, also known as postcentral gyrus. In frontal lobe, primary motor is then responsible for performing the movement, which is voluntary. So movement is planned in the premotor area and performed in primary motor area. The frontal eye field, the area in pink over here, is involved in eye movement associated with the frontal field only. Whenever there is stroke, the eye deviates towards the lesion, and as there is a seizure in this area, the eye deviates away from the lesion. Now coming to Broca's area, this is a high Yeild concept. So Broca's area is responsible for speech production. Now since we know the functions of the areas and the lobe, let's discuss the lesions. Since it's involved in motivation, if frontal lobe is damaged, there will be lack of motivation. There will be personality changes as the prefrontal area is associated with social behavior and personality. Most importantly and most high yield, there will be expressive aphasia. That means there is a lesion in Broca's area. There will be broken speech. Just remember B for Broca and B for broken speech. So a person can understand, can listen, but cannot speak properly. This was all about the frontal lobe. One more important point is that this is the most common site for pyogenic brain abscess. So moving on to the next high yield concept, which is the parietal lobe. So parietal lobe consists of the primary somatosensory cortex, the one in orange labeled as number 3, and somatosensory association area labeled as number 4. So since we discussed parietal lobe is involved in perception, which is sensation and spatial, it is involved in two types of sensation, the cutaneous, which can be a pinprick, temperature, light touch, vibration, or proprioception. Now, cortical sensibility is also assessed in parietal lobe, which involves two-point discrimination, graphesthesia, which is an ability to recognize numbers, letters, or symbols. Then there is stereognosis, which is the ability to recognize the shapes. It is also involved in somatognosia, that means knowing where a part of your body is. For example, if you're blindfolded and you have raised your arms, you know where in the space your arms are. That is the function of the parietal lobe, specifically the primary somatosensory cortex and somatosensory association area. Both of these combined are known as post-central gyrus. Association area is mainly involved in integrating the sensory information into spatial information. So in the dominant hemisphere, it is mainly associated with language and comprehension. Keep in mind, if the person has left side dominant, he is right-handed. However, if a person has right side dominant, he or she is left-handed. The non-dominant side is responsible for spatial attention. So to summarize, the parietal lobe is involved in cutaneous and cortical sensation and spatial perception. The dominant side is involved in language and comprehension. The non-dominant side is involved in spatial attention. Now, when there is a lesion of parietal lobe, it will obviously result in contralateral sensory loss. There will be a syndrome called neglect syndrome, which means there will be a failure to perceive or attend stimuli on one side of body, and it often occurs in the non-dominant hemisphere lesion. Now, since this was involved in somatognosia, there will be asomatognosia due to lesion of parietal lobe. There will be astereogenesis, that means the person will not be able to identify the shapes. There will be agraphia, the person will not be able to identify the numbers and the letters. The person will not be able to discriminate between 2 points. Also, there will be a cutaneous sensory loss as well. Let's move on to the temporal lobe. So temporal lobe, as you can see in the diagram over here, the sixth area, these are not the Brodmann classification numbers, these are just the numbers given by me. So the label 6 over here is the primary auditory cortex, which is involved in hearing, as we said that it is involved with the tone. The 7th is the Wernicke's area. This is a high Yeild concept. So this is responsible for speech comprehension. The Broca's area over here was responsible for speech production. The Wernicke's area and the temporal lobe is responsible for speech comprehension. The area labeled 9th in the temporal lobe is the limbic association cortex, having hippocampus and amygdala in it. These are both involved in memory and emotion. Furthermore, an associative auditory cortex is also present, which interprets the spoken and the written language. So every area in brain has a primary cortex area and then an association area. The primary cortex area is able to receive the senses, and then the association area is involved with interpretation of the senses. Now let's discuss the lesions. As we're discussing that it is involved in hearing, if there is a bilateral temporal lesion, it will result in cortical deafness. If there is a lesion in Wernicke's area, there will be a condition called aphasia. Now, this means that the person produces a fluent but meaningless speech. If there is a lesion in hippocampus, there is memory loss, and the person having a temporal lobe lesion might face some hallucination, deja vu. Deja vu is a type of epilepsy. There is increased temporal firing. So before we move forward, I would like to correct this. This is receptive aphasia, and it makes much more sense. The person is not able to comprehend this speech, which is receive the speech. So receptive aphasia, so he or she produces a fluent but meaningless speech. Again, this one was expressive aphasia, as the person is unable to express speech, has a broken speech. The lesion in Broca's area leads to expressive aphasia, and lesion in Wernicke's area leads to receptive aphasia. Now, this was all for temporal lobe. We will move on to the last one present over here, which is the occipital lobe. As you can see, the one in green, it is primarily involved in vision. It has a primary visual cortex and visual association area. As we just discussed, that each lobe will have an area receiving the primary sense, which for occipital lobe is vision, and the association area will help in recognition and interpretation. If there is a lesion of occipital lobe, it can result in contralateral homonymous heminopia, also visual agnosia. If there is a bilateral lesion, it will result in cortical blindness. So the lesions homonymous heminopia, contralaterally visual agnosia, and bilateral cortical blindness. And before I conclude this, I would like to add some points. So there is a condition known as prosopagnosia. This is that the person is unable to recognize faces. Whenever an MCQ comes related to this, the first answer for choice will be a lesion in parietal lobe. Then you can choose a lesion in temporal lobe if parietal is not in the options. And if both of these are not in the options, you can use occipital lobe. So all of the difficult terms are usually associated with parietal lobe lesion, such as agasthisia, which is unable to recognize the number and the letters. There is loss of 2-point discrimination. There is agraphia, dermatognosia. There is dressing apraxia, constructional apraxia, and geographic disorientation associated with parietal lobe lesion as well. Now, talking about the white matter, the white matter of the cerebrum consists of association fibers, the commissural fibers, and the projection fibers. The association fibers are the ones which connect the areas in the same hemisphere. For example, the arcuate fasciculus, as you can see in this diagram, connects the Broca's area with the Wernicke's area. It is an example of association fiber. The second type is commissural fiber, which connects the two hemispheres. As we discussed early on, the two cerebral hemispheres are associated with corpus callosum. The projection fibers are those which project from a part of a brain to another part of the brain. For example, some fibers project from the brain stem to the cortex through internal capsule, one of which will be pyramidal corticospinal tract fibers. Now, coming to this diagram, let's discuss what happens if there's a lesion in each part of this. If there's a lesion in Broca's area, as we discussed early on, there will be expressive aphasia. That means B for Broca and B for broken language. The person will not be able to speak properly. If there's a lesion in Wernicke's area, there will be receptive aphasia, which means the person can speak fluently, but they will have a meaningless speech. Now, if there is a lesion in both Broca's area and Wernicke's area, it is known as global aphasia. The person is not able to receive or express. So, a lesion involving arcuate fasciculus is known as associative aphasia. It is also known as conductive or anomic aphasia. This kind of aphasia also occurs when there is a lesion of angular gyrus or in the non-dominant Broca's area. So this was all about aphasia, and this is a very high yield topic. In our next videos, we will be discussing other parts of the brain, including the lesions and the important MCQs. Please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned. Thank you.